In your opinion, should we be more aware? Should we be more scared? Should we be more proactive?
So I think there were 4. Yes.
Sorry.
I'm Paul Scott. I'm the CEO of Health Alliance for Austin Musicians, HAAM. Because usually I need to lead off and say, hey, I'm with HAAM, because everybody in Austin knows what HAAM is.
Right.
We are an organization that provides access to affordable health care for our local working musicians, and we provide other services around prevention and wellness. And so we've been around since 2005. So I'm happy to be here to talk more about the organization and kind of what we're doing to help keep Austin music the live capital of the world.
Yeah, that's very important, I'm sure. I mean, I'm new to Austin, so I'm kind of learning what is important here for the community. Obviously, music is a big part of what makes Austin unique.
Yes.
You can kind of feel that vibe. I live not too far away from the studio, which is considered, I guess, downtown still. And so I have a lot of bars near us, a lot of live music. And so you just feel that energy here. So I can guarantee that it's very important to the people of Austin that musicians are taken care of so they can keep producing the great music that they do.
So what brought you to Austin?
Great question. So I work for a company called Rougette, and they do men's health, erectile dysfunction treatments, mostly telehealth. Mm-hmm. I've been working for them since 2020, right before the pandemic started. And of course, back then, telehealth was kind of this new, bizarre concept. We didn't really know where it was going to go. And then when the pandemic happened, it just exploded because that was the best way for patients to access medical providers by being remote. And so the company has just done so well, and I've loved every step of the way working with the people. And so we decided to bring ourselves closer together. So now I'm spending half my time in Austin here where they're headquartered at, and then the other half back in Florida where I'm from. Just really trying to contribute any way that I can to help the company. They don't need my help, but just try to really enjoy working with them and being able to contribute. So that's what's brought me here and kind of how we've made this podcast. So if you want to say how did you get to Austin? What's your story with how you've ended up here?
Oh, well, I got to Texas actually first. So in 2003, I was up in the Dallas area where I was the executive director of the Gay and Lesbian Community Center up there.
Yeah.
And then I was recruited to come down here to actually start advocating for LGBTQ rights for Equality Texas. So I lobbied at the state capitol for about 4 years, working with them, fighting the windmills at the Texas Capitol on LGBTQ issues, and then I moved over to Aid Services of Austin, where I was their CEO for about 12 years, and now I'm with Health Alliance. So I'm down in Austin just because my husband was working at Whole Foods Market down here. I was commuting from Dallas, and so we need to get down to Austin and just live the life here.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What have you thought so far? You enjoying it?
Well, 17 years into it, I hope we like it.
That's true.
Otherwise, I've been miserable for 17 years. No, it's been great. It's been fun to kind of just really have access to the outdoors almost the entire year, of course. Here in Austin, had a good friend of mine that came down from Wisconsin this week, and he was like, I can't believe I'm sitting here in shorts, and I think that day it was like 87 degrees, and
Incredible.
and it's February still. So.
Yes, that's definitely one of the reasons why it's been a little easier for me and my partner to adjust here, because coming from Florida, anything below 60 degrees is like trauma for me because I'm just used to being warm. So we've had really good luck with the weather here. So how have you seen the music scene change in the last 17 years? I know you've probably been there firsthand to see how things have evolved, especially through the pandemic. Is it moving in a good direction? Do you feel like music is more booming here, or do you feel like things have changed in a more negative direction? Where do you see music of Austin going right now?
I think you're seeing a kind of a yin and yang, in terms of that question.
Sure.
There's good things happening, bad things happening. Obviously, with the Austin's growth and I have to say explosive growth over the last 17 years. I remember when I first came here, Frost Tower was the tallest building, and can you see the Frost Tower now?
Right.
It's just covered up. And I think with that has come with some pressures on the music scene, obviously with affordability for our working musicians. And so that's one area that we're trying to address at HAAM, is trying to eliminate some of these barriers that our musicians have to staying here, because we want them to be healthy. But at the same time, that we want to make sure they can afford their insurance and afford their rent and be able to kind of create and play here as well. So I think that's an area that we've got multiple organizations and also trying to help our musicians stay here. I think at the same time We're starting to see a little bit of a pickup in the industry here. Where Nashville has a more robust kind of industry in terms of the producers and the studios. And then we also see that a lot of our musicians sometimes are having to go out to LA, for example, to kind of produce. And so what we're hoping to see is the growth of the industry here, so we can kind of keep everything here. And like, how do we create an ecosystem that supports that? Because the one thing I talk about, with HAAM is, we promote Austin as the life capital of the world, and people are, attracting and recruiting people to come to Austin for that. Corporations are. But how are we encouraging our corporations and the city and the county and other entities to kind of invest in that so that we can keep that moniker and make it mean something and kind of, invest in that so that, people can come here for the live music and be able to enjoy it, and our musicians can afford to live here as well.
Right. Definitely. So yeah, that's one of the questions I was just thinking about, speaking of affording. So how do musicians in general make money? Like, I am very ignorant in regards to anything that really in the entertainment industry. I've never really, worked in that field, but I go to live music shows. I pay my cover charge sometimes when it's required, and they never really have a tip jar out for most of the places that I've gone. So I always just wonder, if you're working at a bar or if you're working at a venue, like how are musicians really making money? Isn't it? I'm not sure if you're the.
Well, they're getting paid for a gig, so it's kind of a set price in many cases, and so. There was an article that came out last year, and Marcia Ball, who was a longtime musician here in the Central Texas area. Well, she's kind of world-renowned, actually. And so she's one of our board members at HAAM. Wow. But she was talking about really how compensation for gigs has not really changed that much in 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
Crazy.
I mean, that's a lot to say. If someone's getting paid $600 for a gig, well, they're having to, if they got band members, they're having to share that with the band members as well. So particularly if you're a starting, artist, musician, and you're trying to get, into the game and into the industry here, you're having to work multiple jobs. Not only you're doing your music, but you're maybe working at a coffee shop, or you may be doing other things that gives you flexibility so you can play. So it's really kind of piecing this all together. But we do have different organizations in Austin that kind of help people to kind of steer them into kind of, okay, here's how you develop your business. Here's how you sell yourself. So we have infrastructure in place to help people, but at the same time, it's the income is limited. For our musicians that we serve over 3,000 musicians at HAAM. 80% of them earn less than $24,000 a year. So think about those of you that know Austin, the affordability issues. That's not a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, and thinking too, we just moved here. We're in an apartment right now. We would love to, buy a house. So we've been looking at property in the Austin area, especially close by to downtown for convenience, and it's insanely expensive. I can't really compare it to any other city that I've been to where the price of owning a home that maybe was a different value just a few years ago, especially it shows you on some of these websites, like this is what the cost is for the house, but this is what they paid for it a few years ago, and it's almost double in some instances. So how are local artists even able to find affordable apartments or affordable places to live? Is that something that our resources are available for them, or is it kind of like we're still trying to figure out how to guide that difficult situation?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, an ongoing dialogue. I think
right.
The most recent music needs assessment that came out, the census came out, of course, affordability was the number one issue. Housing was up there with that as kind of that component. And so it's a huge amount of money you're talking about when you're talking about trying to provide support for people in housing. And I've been part of housing programs for LGBT or HIV, people with HIV for 20 plus years, and it takes a huge investment. So I think we're going to look at creatively in Austin about what can we do, maybe as opposed to just providing, say, rental assistance, for example. Are there some tax credits to homeowners that rent to musicians maybe,
right.
or is there some other mechanism by which you can encourage musicians to kind of stay here and live here, that they get some sort of stipend, right. from the city. We've got to think creatively if you want to kind of keep people here, particularly in the music scene, so that we can stay the live music capital of the world. And so there's discussions that are happening now is like developing housing, for example. Do we look at housing centers for musicians or some combination thereof, or allocating housing? There are programs in other cities, like New Orleans has a good, great program that they developed in the 9th Ward that has a kind of musician housing, but also studios and rehearsal spaces as well. So is there an opportunity for us to look at that in Austin? So I think there's opportunities here. We just got to execute on them.
For sure. Do you feel like the elected officials of Austin are aware of this problem and they're focused on trying to help musicians, or is it something that you kind of have to push them for? What's your kind of been experience with people in power?
Yeah, I think our elected officials here are very much on board in terms of keeping Austin going with the live music scene. I think you've got your attention here, with developers and corporations, and maintaining kind of like how do you maintain kind of the developments and the venues on Red River Street, for example. And we've seen different venues disappear over the years. You see new venues happening down on South Manchac, for example. So you've got new venues opening up and opportunities, but our elected officials they understand housing is an issue just generally,
right?
And then they understand that, but then also there's a huge amount of support for the music community. Our Mayor Watson was at our ribbon cutting for our grand opening of our building yesterday, and several council members, and so I think it's universal support for musicians, and we just need to look at how do we continue or kind of grow that support, particularly with financial support or tax breaks or whatever that may look like in terms of the music industry.
Gotcha. So, of course, if you're on a limited income, the last thing many of my patients that I treat in telehealth, they don't have insurance because they can't afford it. They look for an alternative. Telehealth ends up being a cheaper option for them. So if you're making $25,000 or less a year, it's guaranteed you're not probably able to afford health insurance. I mean, premiums are outrageous. So for these people, what is that process typically like when they come to your organization? Do they say, I need help, I don't have insurance? Or like, say there's a listener right now who is a new artist in Austin and wants to know how they can get involved and find, healthcare. What would be their process, or how would that work for them?
Yeah, a lot of times it happens, it's word of mouth. So if a musician is on HAAM, we call it on HAAM, but if they're getting assistance through HAAM, they'll tell another musician. We also have outreach programs. Our big focus now is trying to do outreach and educate musicians of color in the community and female musicians and LGBTQ musicians about HAAM and what we do, so that we can educate them and raise that awareness as they can take advantage of that. Because it's not only access to health insurance, we also have stipends for dental care. We have support for basic needs such as food assistance. We have access to hearing services, so our musicians get their testing hearing. They get customized earplugs so that they can protect their hearing. They also have access to vision services. We have ability to provide LASIK for our musicians that need it. For if they qualify, some strict criteria around that, obviously, because of the medical component. So I think it's really kind of the outreach. I know, like if I'm Central Market one time had their Hatch Chili Festival, and there's a whole bunch of musicians playing, and so I'm going one by one to them and say, "Do you know about HAAM?" Yeah, oh yeah, I'm on HAAM. Another person, I just moved here, I don't know about HAAM.
Right.
We kind of have our outreach to kind of educate our musicians around this word of mouth, and just hopefully try to get it out there. I think sometimes it's a struggle. Some people don't think they need insurance is the key issue, and so then they have to hit an emergency, and all of a sudden, like, what am I going to do? I don't have health care. I may have to have something extreme, in terms of the cost and the medical debt I'm going to incur. And that's the area that we're really trying to encourage our musicians to sign up for the insurance, was because we want to make sure they have it in case there is an emergency. Right. But also there's the preventative aspects to it as well. And that's a huge education component that we focus on with our health navigators, is getting you in for your annual exam. It's 100%. If you got the insurance, it's 100% covered.
Right.
So you could get all your tests. You could get a testosterone test. If you got low testosterone, for example.
Perfect.
And encouraging people to do that, because nationally, 33% of men actually get an annual exam, even though it's 100% covered by their insurance. Yeah. Same for women in terms of getting their mammogram. We work to remind them about that. So preventative and wellness is kind of a core component of what we do as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find that a lot of my patients too, they'll come to me almost like more of an urgent care situation where, I just need something really quick, and they skip all their preventative care, type screenings and just follow up and trying to educate them on how important it is just to establish a relationship with a primary doctor, use that free benefit if you do have insurance. Even if not, you're able to still, navigate usually the system, at least over telehealth, to find a primary care provider and establish to have that sort of record of, this is what I'm like when I'm healthy. So when I do get sick, there's a way that we can at least navigate those symptoms. A lot of times patients present last last point of the scenario when they're needing something critical, and like you mentioned, can be much more expensive. So those preventative screenings can really help. I definitely know from my experience when talking to younger patients, it's harder to get them to buy in because they haven't really had health issues. Do you find that problem as well when you're trying to outreach and educate the community that younger patients are a little bit like, I don't need this isn't for me? Is that an issue that your navigators have run into?
I think that's typically the case. For any young person, I'm invincible.
Right.
I can be burning my candles at both ends, and, gigging for 4 days in a row, no rest, no food, and
right.
And so we actually, that's part of our education is like, we can help you out, particularly on the financial criteria. You may qualify that we could move you on to one of our programs that we have a partnership with Central Health on, and so you could get 100% of your premiums covered. In some cases, if you're on the Central Health program, and so it's just easy breezy for you to, your insurance is covered. Go get your services, get your screenings. Particularly if you're trying to, your instrument is your life,
Right.
So whether it's your hands or fingers playing the guitar or drums, or whether it's your vocal cords, if you're singing, this is your livelihood. So you need to protect that and invest in that. And so, we provide access to screenings, not only through your health insurance, but we also just do regular screenings we have partnerships with multiple providers. So like the hearing screening I mentioned earlier. But there's also, we do, vocal screenings. We've got one coming up in a couple of weeks, for example. So do I have nodes, on my vocal cords? Better to know that in advance so I can get and take care of. And so it doesn't have, something more dramatic that happens that affects my voice and I can't work anymore.
Right. Are those screenings typically open to the public, or is it mostly just the members of HAAM, or is it members of HAAM and then they can tell their friends, like, hey, I know this musician, he just moved into town. There's this screening coming up. Are they able to bring their friends, or is that something that's just strictly for, once you're already a member of HAAM?
Yeah, typically it's for our members because
Right.
of the qualifications
Sure.
for being a member. Qualifying for, qualifications for our membership is you have to be 400% of federal poverty level or below. Most of our musicians, qualify for that. You have to be working in kind of the 5-county area within about 60, 90 miles of the Austin Center. And then you have to be a working musician. So just document. And we're really creative about that. And we try to remind people, like, we're not talking about people that are just doing rock and roll and R&B. We serve classical musicians, piano teachers, instrumental teachers. So we really are kind of expansive in terms of how we qualify and define musicians.
Sure. So can you give me a little bit of background on how HAAM started? Like, was it a group of people who were like, hey, there's a problem here, let's fix it? Did people already have experience in healthcare to navigate it quite quickly? Like, how did it come about? What's the history there?
Well, great that you asked that question, because we've just been talking about this for the last 2 days. We actually opened up our permanent home this week and had a grand opening. And it's named after our founder, who was Robin Shivers. So she and her husband, Bud, were kind of instrumental in supporting the organization and its foundation. Robin was a businesswoman, and she was very heavily involved in the music industry. And it came about one time where she was working with a musician who was really not focused on making money. He talks about this, Troy Campbell. He was actually our first member of HAAM, actually. And so he talks about how he was just giving away his CDs and not focused on the business side. And so she started working with him on the business side. But then she also asked him, like, okay, well, what are you doing about you and your band doing for your health care? Right. And like, well, I can't worry about health care. I can't put food on the table, for example. And she goes, well, we're going to fix that. It's like, that's unacceptable. So she was very well known and very well in place in terms of philanthropist in the community. Worked with Seton Hospital, was on their philanthropy board there, mm-hmm. And so she just went and started using her heft, in terms of her reputation, to kind of get the Seton on board first to kind of work within their charitable care system. And then she cobbled together a group of people to come on board, like Ray Benson with the Sleep at the Wheel. He was one of the founding board members. And she brought other people to the table to kind of say, okay, we really need to do this. And she has such command. They said, well, we have to do it because Robin's asking us.
Yeah.
And as a result, that's how it started. And it started off with Troy Campbell as our first member. And then it moved kind of like in the next 2 years to like 500 members. And
wow.
Now we're serving over 3,100 members a year.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And so is there a partnership with a specific hospital system? Is there a partnership with the federal government or the state government? Do you have a private insurance partnership? Like, who is really supporting these insurance plans? Like, how does that typically work?
Yeah, I think that's where we excel is in partnerships, because opposed to us trying to create a program ourselves or create services ourselves, we actually work to make those partnerships happen so we can leverage their systems in place as opposed to creating another system ourselves. So it started off with Ascension Seton was our first partner. They're still a critical partner of ours. St. David's Foundation also came on board at the same time to help provide assistance for dental services, and they continue to provide support for our dental program. We also have a strong relationship with Central Health, which is our hospital district in the area. It's kind of a quasi-governmental entity. And so they actually have their separate insurer, kind of local insurer called Sendero. And so they fund that program to provide insurance for low-income people throughout Travis County, actually. And HAAM members, we have a separate program for them that they can access that insurance. That's the one I was talking about earlier, that people can get 100% of their premium covered. So it's, and then we also work with partners, specialists, in terms of ear, nose, and throat. So it's really kind of creating those relationships so that our members have access to different type of care. Half Helen is another nonprofit we partner with, and that's for eyeglasses.
Sure.
Sharp Eye Care, they provide LASIK surgery. So I can go on. I don't think we have enough time to talk about all the partnerships, but that's how we facilitate it in a way to kind of make sure we have an expansive array of services available to our musicians.
Gotcha. And so most of the funding then is through those partnerships. I guess, would that be how they're supported mostly as this plan, or do you get like federal grants or state grants? How is the whole sort of organization being funded primarily?
Yeah, so we do get some funding from our partners in terms of just ongoing funding to support kind of our staff to be able to link them into their services. But the majority of our money actually comes from individuals. That's a good thing in many ways. I've worked with nonprofits for 25 years, and particularly with most of them being heavily dependent on federal or state, local grants. A lot of strings attached to those. So we actually have individual donations and then our key events. So we have like Ray Benson's birthday bash coming up next week, 2 weeks. And then we have our corporate battle of the bands that's in June 7th. And then we have the biggest event we have is HAAM Day, which is a day of music throughout the entire city of Austin. So we have like 200 musicians playing across town at 60 venues. Starts at 6 a.m, goes until well past midnight at different venues. And so we raised last year over $860,000 through that event. And so one day we're trying to get towards that $1 million goal for that event to hit at some point, because it's just a great day to celebrate music.
Yeah.
At the same time, bring attention to the needs of our musicians.
And that when was that again?
So that's going to be Tuesday, September 19th this year.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Very cool. So I will put that on my calendar.
Oh, definitely.
My partner and I are always trying to find things to do now. We're relatively new here, like I mentioned, and we've been working a lot in the evening, so our schedule is going to be opening up soon in the evening. So we want to be like going to as much live music as we can. We had a guest also talking about the burlesque scene recently, so I definitely want to learn more about the Austin burlesque scene as well. But as far as the corporate battle of the bands, that also sounds really interesting. That you said is coming up.
That's coming up June 7th. So if anybody's listening to this and you've got you've got a bunch of people that in your company or your corporation, that can pull together a band. We've got a few slots open, and there's a buy-in to that. So essentially, I think it's like a $10,000 buy-in to get into the corporate battle of the bands. But it is one of the most amazing events. So last year was my first year actually as the CEO, and I'm thinking, okay, great. It's going to be some employees. They get together in their garage, and it's going to be fun, but kind of kitschy. No,
they went in.
It's like they're like it's like a professional band. Like HEB always has a band.
Wow.
And they're death metal, and they do pop. They do death metal versions of pop covers. And it is not only incredible in terms of how they turn it into kind of this awesome death metal, but it's also just funny too.
Right.
Like if you're hearing Katy
the
Perry.
lyrics.
it's like wow. Like didn't know you could morph that song into that cool of a way.
Yeah. How many bands typically get involved?
I think this year we're slotting about 11 bands to come in. We had, I think, 8 last year. And so it's just a great night. And so it's a great way to engage corporations and their employees in the work that we're doing, but it's also open to the public as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So definitely a great way to give back and also enjoy yourself would be to go to one of these events. But for people who want to take that next step, me and my partner, we're always trying to find ways to contribute to the communities that we're in. And, being a part of the LGBTQ community, we're always trying to give back to gay entertainment as well as just musicians in general. I think music and LGBT sort of culture go really hand in hand. And so how can we give back? Are there things we can do physically? Can we volunteer with our time or, financially? Who should we give to? For those of us who don't really know where to get started but want to give back in the Austin music scene.
Yeah, great. Yeah, our website is myhaam.org, so it's myhaam. It's 2 A's, not one, but myhaam.org/donate. So that's first of all, great way. We'd love for people to support us. You can do it at $5 a month or just $5, or we have our Pearl Society, which is kind of our think of it as our major donor club. Essentially, it's $1,000 and above. And with that, if someone gives to that, they can do it on a monthly basis. You get access to 4 curated events every year at different cool venues. Like we just had a great venue at Arlen Studios, which is an old studio, kind of great, historical place here. We were getting ready to set up, and Gary Clark Jr. is recording as we're setting up. But we had some great new folks playing at these, great up and coming talents as well as established talents that come into these events. It's just a fun way to kind of engage with live music in a very intimate environment. And then, of course, we have our volunteer program. We call them HAAMbassadors. We like to use a lot of ham puns around there. It's like, why not? It's like, and I thought maybe they all had been identified prior to my coming to the organization, but apparently I've come up with some new ones. But our HAAMbassadors are great in terms of supporting our events. That really helps extend what we can do, because that means that we've got additional capacity because our volunteers can do, as opposed to trying to hire someone to do that. Right. So it allows us to do more programs in the communities. We have a lot of third-party events. If you love music, being an HAAMbassador is a great way, one, to kind of get involved with live music with us, but it also gives you an entry point to other bands that may need help with selling their merchandise, for example, or we have some other nonprofits that we partner with that have similar type of events, and so we share our volunteers across different organizations, and people get in for free to hear this great music.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome way that my partner and I can definitely contribute. We'd love to be HAAMbassadors. So what would that be like? Do we just log on the website and apply to be a volunteer, or? Yeah,
you go to the website, kind of look for the volunteer or HAAMbassador opportunity there, and just send your name in, and we'll follow up with you on that. I could probably follow up with you individually.
Yeah. We're here.
Loop y'all in immediately. You'll probably send you the packet right away. But yeah, some great opportunities there. I think it's really cool with our volunteer programs, like get to meet people.
Yeah.
We're talking people like they've been doing this for 10, 12 years, or since the beginning of HAAM, 17 years. And that longevity is just incredible with any nonprofit organization, that people have stuck with us
for sure
that long. And so I've learned to truly appreciate our HAAMbassadors, because we couldn't do it without them. And so there's some unique opportunities for people to come in and help us. So
for sure,
hope y'all could do it.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun and a great way to meet people. Obviously, again, trying to make friends and be more involved in the community. So I also wanted to touch on just sort of some of your history. I'm very passionate about HIV/AIDS awareness. I mean, obviously, we're seeing this brand new sort of horizon for HIV prevention with PrEP, and the access to PrEP being so robust,
right,
which is so encouraging and something that I did not anticipate. I actually first heard about PrEP back in 2012. I was in clinical rotations and read an article about it. It had not even gotten any mainstream television time yet or ad space time. I actually went to my provider at the time and said, "Hey, I want to be on this medicine. It can reduce the risk of HIV." And he was like, "I have no idea what this is."
Mm-hmm.
And it actually was that journey for a few years. I was able to access it relatively early on and realize I had no side effects. It was a once daily tablet, and it would dramatically really change my perception of how I saw my sexuality and feeling safe during something that's obviously so intimate and so important when you're building relationships and dating. So if you just want to kind of give a little bit of your experience working in that industry, obviously it's what's led you to being where you're at now with your experience in healthcare. What was that like, and what is it kind of, did you see much of a change? Obviously, you've seen a change throughout time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's been a significant change. Yeah, I really started working in this area in about 1995, so it's been a while. Wow. And so I was on a board of directors of a HIV organization in Chattanooga, being positive myself. I was a client, and those were the early days where there wasn't much treatment, and so I kind of went through my own difficult journey, near death several times in the early 90s. And then the new medications came out, which are the protease inhibitors, which are kind of the genesis for PrEP that you're talking about. Right. And that was transformational in terms of like me being in the hospital, basically being told I wouldn't live through the night, to 6 weeks later I was snorkeling in Hawaii.
Incredible.
So just a dramatic turnaround. And so over time, we kind of, we saw the need for people to get educated about protease inhibitors and about new regimens. And then we also know that communities of color really needed to be educated and raise awareness and trying to eliminate barriers and stigma. Stigma is a huge issue. Stigma for both HIV treatment, but also for PrEP. It's a huge stigma around PrEP, and
for sure.
And communities of color is thinking about sexual activity and equating that with promiscuity. And we need to think of it as a healthcare issue and healthcare prevention. What a great way to save money for the healthcare system, first of all, but also save lives for people. So I think it's great to see that we're normalizing this in some ways, even though there's some challenges and struggles with the PrEP programs in parts of the country now. We see this as kind of continuing area that we need to expand and educate people on. It's some area I'd like for us to kind of partner with our local organizations here with HAAM so that we can maybe move some of our members and then educate them about PrEP as well, because it's not just about gay people being on PrEP, it's about heterosexual being on it. If you're sexually active, you want to protect yourself. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to continue to expand this, with different communities, particularly communities of color.
Absolutely. And so it sounds like obviously you have a ton of experience in healthcare and learning to navigate these really complex scenarios and situations. Is your experience with HIV/AIDS and learning, through that early process, has that really contributed to how you've become so knowledgeable about navigating healthcare right now? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who want to get into this industry. Even myself, I've thought about how can I start a nonprofit? What can I do to give back? Obviously, it's a bunch of work and a lot of difficulty to navigate that whole process. But can you kind of talk about how your experience has kind of prepared you for that, or did you just kind of fall into that placement? Like what kind of led you to being in this leadership position in a nonprofit?
Yeah, I think it came about because of having to navigate through the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And, when your doctor wants to get you on a medication, like you remember the human growth hormone, and back in the probably the mid 90s, early mid 90s, that was a treatment trying to keep people with lean muscle mass.
Yes.
So my doctor was trying to get me on it. And so then, I had to advocate to my insurance company and fight them. And so it's like, and here you are, if you've got, whether it's HIV or whether it's cancer or anything, and to put the patient in the position of having to fight for life-saving care is an insane way our system is set up, because it's all based on kind of cost. And it's like, well, we're not going to pay for it because it costs too much. You need to use maybe the substandard or not so effective treatment, for example, or the whole step therapy, for example, where people say, well, you need to try this first and this first. And I think that kind of drove me into the advocacy world. So then I became an advocate for people with HIV. I was the only one that would speak about it in Chattanooga, so I was kind of the person talking about it all the time, and I started advocating at the state level. So that's where I started getting my advocacy chops on both HIV as well as LGBTQ issues. And so with that, I just saw the ability to kind of use my voice to be able to help people and provide services, and then slowly had to educate myself. I grew up kind of as a professional in the Ryan White system. If you're Ryan White Care Act provides funding for people with HIV, and so having to kind of advocate and fight around that and for programming and services. And so then I was an attorney originally. And I was a trial practice attorney for 9 years. Yeah, it's like
you're too nice to be an attorney.
Exactly. And so then I got into nonprofit, and it's like, oh, this is what work is supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
It was just, you got to find your place, know. And
sure.
so being an attorney was definitely not my place. And so that's another whole podcast.
We should talk
I got
about
some
that.
stories on that, particularly in rural Tennessee and Georgia. There's some cuckoo stuff that happens out there. Yeah.
Yes, we are having you back just for that talk,
Okay.
please.
It's entertaining. But yeah, so then, I got to be into nonprofit and I was like, oh, God, this is super fulfilling. And it's just like, it's about living a life of service. It's just, seeing what you can do for people and people in need and how much they appreciate it. Everybody needs help at some point. And, I think sometimes in America we talk about, oh, we're individualistic and rugged and everybody pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, if you don't got bootstraps, it's going to hard to pull them up. So you need to be able to give people some bootstraps, at least for them to get on their own. And I think that's, how I like to help is just make sure people kind of eventually have the tools and resources they need to be successful. The same thing we're doing here at HAAM is setting people up for success so they can live their dream, be creative, and live their music dream. Yes.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it sounds like this is something that I hope people learn more about. I hope other communities catch on. Music is a fundamental part of how we interact with each other, how we are entertained, and how we enjoy where we live. And so it's interesting that this hopefully it's catching on. I'm just not aware. Hopefully other cities are becoming more involved and wanting to give back to their local musicians. Obviously you've been working in healthcare, which can be a very difficult and a lot of adversity, kind of trying to get the funds you need, trying to advocate for people, especially people in a minority, communities or, obviously the LGBT plus community. So have you felt as though it's been difficult to navigate sometimes kind of getting your voice heard or felt backlash from trying to be vocal, especially, earlier in your career, advocating for HIV/AIDS in a community that could maybe feel homophobic? I'm from the South as well, so I definitely can relate to feeling like advocating for myself may result in a lot of negativity, which is always really been a reason why I have stayed quiet, I think, especially in my local community back in Jacksonville. I don't really put myself out there in fear of backlash. Have you kind of just grown a tough skin through the years, or any kind of advice you could give for people who are a little bit scared to kind of put themselves out there and advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I have not grown a tough skin at all. That's hard sometimes, but I think it also helps that I haven't, because if you tough skin, sometimes you get a little jaded,
right,
and you kind of lose sight. So I'm still super sensitive. Oh, I can't believe they didn't invite me in or something.
Me too. Very me.
But I think it's also, if you believe in, to me, it's about believing what is important,
right,
and if you truly believe in what you're doing, and I think that's gets you over that hump of that fear or that being scared. And I talk about, I always talk about this when I was at Equality Texas and we were training people to, advocate for LGBTQ rights on the Capitol in a very conservative environment. And just to remind them, it's you've been advocating your entire life. You advocated for that toy when you were at Christmas time or whatever your birthday. Right. You had a strong case for that. So if you truly believe in what you're talking about in terms of your rights or your needs, think about that, because you channel that, what is important to you, and just communicate sincerely to people what it means to you and why it's important for them to hear you and to hopefully support you. So I think it's important to kind of keep that as the mindset. At the same time, as we look at equity issues in our community, we have to have different approaches, particularly for established organizations like HAAM and other organizations that may be developed kind of out of a white kind of culture basis in terms of serving mostly white males in the music industry at first, and how do we build relationships in a way that are authentic, not ask people to sit at our table, that we go and sit at other people's tables.
Right.
And that if you're setting a table, you're setting the table at the very beginning with the people that need to be part of what that looks like, as opposed to kind of setting the parameters and then inviting people in. You really have to be inclusive at the very beginning in your thought process if you're going to be able to kind of engage people, overcome reticence or phobias, whatever that may look like in terms of people's attitudes.
Right. And I assume that there's been opposition to a lot of the things you've been, advocating for, from HIV AIDS to where we're at now with, trying to get affordable healthcare for musicians. Have you ever felt targeted by people that are maybe also on Capitol Hill trying to oppose the things that you're preaching or the things that you are trying to promote? Or has that not really been an issue for you?
I think it's gotten better over the years. I think more specifically around HIV, I think our legislators are not going to touch funding, right. For example. They're going to fund the ADAP program at the state, for example. Okay. I think definitely less so when it comes to the musicians, for example. It's hard to hate our musicians. So, yeah. That's a little bit of relief in terms of moving into this role where you don't have that same kind of stop. We're not going to support this. I think the tension comes a little bit sometimes like, how do we support this? It's like, okay, there's supporting the industry. And then in our case, how do you support the musicians' needs, particularly their healthcare needs? So I think sometimes you're kind of trying to educate legislators or elected officials about why it's important to do both, right. Actually. For sure. There's been some good success. There's a huge amount of advocacy went into the hotel tax a few years ago that now some of that tax money is going into a musician resource fund that the city administers to help our musicians in different ways. They're determining what that looks like. And that's more on the industry side. But still, that's a great success to kind of tap into that hotel tax. It's very hard to do sometimes.
Sure.
And so then how do we kind of continue to kind of educate our elected officials and funders to this is why this is important. It's been relatively, I won't say easy, but I think people are open and receptive to that, understanding that culturally music is such an integral part of the city that we need to support it and protect it.
Right. Absolutely. I definitely agree there. And hopefully, too, as we promote this, maybe people who are in other areas of Texas or in other cities realize how much Austin is trying to contribute and to help musicians. So maybe that will bring more musicians to this area, give them maybe even a safe haven. I know in Florida, I'm not familiar with any type of resources similar to this. I definitely should do more research about it before saying, but I have never, come in contact with that. I have friends who are musicians who talk about this struggle all the time, especially in Jacksonville, where, it's difficult. Like you mentioned, they have 3 or 4 jobs. They don't have health insurance. And so hopefully these things catch on. Kind of circling back, I know you were talking about Equality Texas, and I'm not sure if you're still active there. And we're also again new here, trying to find ways to be more active in the LGBTQ plus community. Obviously, Florida has some fancy new "don't say gay" laws, and Texas is kind of trying to mirror those in some ways. And so, being between these two states, we're always trying to find ways that we can, be advocates in the LGBTQ plus community. What has your experience been like with here in Texas, just trying to, still raise awareness that we have a long fight ahead of us as members of the gay community, and there's still a lot of work to be done?
Yeah, it's disappointing. It's like Texas is now saying, Florida, you can't out Texas us. So
right.
We're going to show you. When I was at Equality Texas from 2006, 2010, and we saw a lot of happening with the overturning of Lawrence v. Texas in 2005. We saw some of the advancement happening in terms of some of the marriage equality in other parts of the country, whereas Texas passed the amendment in 2005, banning gay marriage. But we really didn't, those 4 years, those 2 sessions, we really didn't have to fight very much. We actually were able to promote some positive things around anti-bullying, for example. So there were negative LGBT bills that were passed, but they just didn't go anywhere. And then now to see this, 15 years, 17 years later, is just so incredibly disappointing that we're going way backwards and to the level of absurdity. If you scan through the bills that have been filed in the Texas legislature, it's just absurd that this is happening in our country and in Texas. It's so much ado about nothing in many ways, and it's just all fear mongering. It's right. Strictly fear mongering. When meanwhile we have so many other issues that are affecting our children in the state. They can't go to school they fear their safety. Right? Am I going to die? They don't have enough food to eat. They don't have heat in their homes. But we're worried about them going to a library and have a drag queen read them a book. And that's where we're spending our energy and time. And this has been happening for centuries, by the way. This is not anything new.
Right.
This is all about fear tactics
Sure.
and to rile people up and like, here are the crumbs I want you to focus on,
right.
so you don't worry about the stuff that we're not doing.
Right. I think too, my generation, I feel like we were kind of in this really opportune time with PrEP, and we grew up in a time where obviously being gay is almost like been a trend in some ways. That's how my mom likes to describe it. For straight people, they say, "Oh, it's a trend now." It's a different way of going through high school and going through college. And so I think we also get a little complacent and forgetful of where our forefathers and foremothers have been and what they've gone through. And I kind of see this response of nonchalant, kind of like blasé da type response from people my age and not really knowing what to do. Is it even really matter? They're kind of just, like you mentioned, in an individualistic society, just focusing on themselves, when all these things are kind of being passed underneath the rug or underneath their eyes, even though they're right there in front of us. In your opinion, should we be more aware? Should we be more scared? Should we be more proactive in trying to be out there saying this is a problem, we need to make a change before these bills get passed? Mm-hmm. Or do you feel like we're kind of just going to have to wait and see what happens?
So I think there are 4. Yes.
Yes. Sorry, that's a lot of questions.
You bring up a legitimate concern.
Yeah,
it's like, because we had these advancements,
right.
And so you end up getting your cake and all this, and then all of a sudden, your cake's maybe not getting taken, but someone else's is. But I was like, well, I got my cake now. Right. So we have to be careful about not being complacent. It's like, well, it's not happening to me. It's like It advanced enough so that I'm protected. But the issue is that how quickly we're seeing things slide backward. After the overturn of Roe versus Wade, there's conversations about overturning marriage. Even though they're saying, okay, the Supreme Court didn't really say that, but we've got people talking about that. So if they're talking about it, they're wanting to do it.
Exactly.
And so I think we have to remain vigilant and advocate and also just educate. And I think this is something we can't do alone. It goes with our straight allies. For those straight allies, they're thinking, oh, it's trendy and it's wonderful.
Right.
Okay, if you think it's so wonderful, then you need to also kind of contact your legislator or your city council member, whoever is working on these anti-LGBTQ issues, to advocate, to say, this is not what we stand for.
Yeah, I think it's also important too, and what I learned with the last, not this just recent election, but election of 2016, a lot of my friends that I thought were allies were not. When I was explaining my points of view, I remember actually my roommate, we had a talk about who we were going to vote for the week before, and I was with 2 of her friends, and I've hung out with them for years. They know me really well. They seem to care about me. And their response to how they thought I wasn't going to be affected by policy change that would be anti-LGBTQ+, and how I shouldn't be concerned was really shocking to me. And it also was shocking to me how little that they thought it affected them. I would have assumed, because we were friends, that they would have been more understanding to where I'm coming from. And so I think also it's important for us to have those conversations that may be uncomfortable with our straight allies, to make sure that they understand where we're coming from, because a lot of times they just assume maybe that we're on the same page as them, or maybe our concerns are more aligned with financial or moral values, whatever they consider that to be. And it was really ultimately shocking to me, in tears, like asking my roommates why they would vote for someone who wanted to take my rights away to get married, or to feel like I belong in the community. And so I think it's important that we do have those conversations too, and still continue to have them. There's still a lot of minds we need to change, and the only way we can do that obviously is just by opening communication. So I'm always trying to figure out ways that I can better educate my family too. I come from a very conservative Christian family, and so sometimes expressing myself can be like talking to a wall. And so that's really, can be overwhelming, because if I can't communicate with my family effectively or my friends effectively, how am I going to go out and advocate is usually where my brain goes. But I still have to remind myself that there are people that are willing to listen. You just have to sometimes go out of your way and put that effort in to make that change. And so that's what I'm trying to do too this year, is really advocate more for myself, for the LGBTQ plus community. I'm a huge fan of drag, so obviously they're under attack right now, and we're seeing this popular response to RuPaul's Drag Race and drag being more commercial, but we're also seeing that negative side of politicians now using that as a weapon. And so it's just been interesting trying to figure out how to navigate that and how to put energy in and support these causes that I am passionate about without without like misstepping or doing things incorrectly or not putting my energy where it's going to be well received. So still figuring that out.
Yeah, it's you mentioned earlier about the kind of uncomfortable conversations. Yeah, it's important to have those uncomfortable dialogues,
Right.
But also how do you approach it from a way understanding that we have so much in common with each other.
Yes,
it's just amazing that we have these kind of discordant things happening and conversations and fights, and when really like there's so much we believe in that are aligned collectively.
Yep.
And so so always try to remind people to lead with the common themes that you can find agreement on to establish a dialogue, and then start just raising how things impact you and what it means to you and your family. Like recently this whole conversation around grooming, trying not to get my blood pressure up. I was brought up in a straight household. I never was around any known gay people. All media, movies, books, everything I was exposed to was straight.
Same.
And somehow I was not groomed to be straight. So this fear of gay people grooming straight people to be gay is it's an absurd argument. That's not, excuse me, people, it's not how that works.
You would think.
Otherwise, we would have a lot of more straight people and less gay people because
Sure.
we were totally groomed to be straight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I can guarantee that the majority of us, especially when we're younger, are very unhappy to find that we are gay because this is quite a traumatic experience. For those of you who don't know, it's not a great feeling to be alienated by your family and friends at age 7, 8, 9, sometimes as early. For me, I knew I was gay at age 5, so my first crush was on this guy. I was like, that's probably not right. Keep that to myself. But that you live with that trauma forever, and then you come out and your family's like, but why? Why would you do this to us? I'm like, I've been trying for 10 years to change this. Yeah. Prayed. I did, whatever, anything you can imagine to try and change my, my mind here. And so it's just interesting to me how that's still, people still think it's like a lifestyle choice, or you can be, groomed or brought into, your sexuality. But circling back around to HAAM, because
Yes.
this is why we're here.
Yes.
And so again, the events that are coming up and how we can get involved, obviously we can become a HAAMbassador, which I'm super excited for. And hopefully that gives us more time to get to know each other. I feel like we have a lot in common, so that'll be great.
Cool, yes.
And then also these events. Let's just remind our audience, the next event is the Corporate Battle of...
Yeah, so the next public event is going to be the Corporate Battle of the Bands. That's going to be June 7th. That's going to be the ACL Live Moody Theater, down the road here. And so we'll be sending out information around that. So go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, because you can get all this information, not only about our events, but also about being HAAMbassador, which you're going to be our lead one.
Oh, right. I love that.
The team's like, no, don't say that.
I'm good with that.
Dr. Tyler is going to be on all of our stuff now.
Love that.
And so sign up at myhaam.org. Easy breezy to sign up. You can also donate there. Also kind of be aware of what's happening. We have our annual report online. So you can see that as well and kind of see what our impact looks like for the community.
Incredible.
But also we can also, our ambassadors can also work on some of our committees, on our event committees, but also some of our board committees. So we've got opportunities for people to be engaged in different ways. And then the best way also to be engaged, regardless, is go to a venue, listen to live music, and support your local musicians, because they need you and they're awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking some time to meet with us today. I'm so excited to have you back, because we definitely have to dive into your history as an attorney and learn all of that. I'll tell you my history my short history as a physician, but I'm sure that we have some things that align there, which is why I'm in telemedicine now. I had an interesting experience even early on. But so excited to touch base on that. Also will give us the time to, recap on us being able to get to know each other better, me being a HAAMbassador, so we can update the listeners. But again, thank you again. I can't wait to touch base with you again soon, and looking forward to my next awesome
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
event.
it.
Yeah, thank you.